Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Scarred Thumb Podcast. It's David back again. It's good to see you guys. Let's see. Hello, Deborah, Silver Bishop, Baron Gaslight. Good to see you guys. While David plays his bullet hell games, I'm bringing one Zomboid 2B4 to the max. Oh, yeah. So, is that the one that added the animals? Build 2042. Do they add in the skill things yet as well, like the blacksmithing and that kind of stuff? Because it did seem like they had some interesting plans to really kind of make late game more interesting. Because it feels like once you stabilize, you almost have to. It becomes a lot less of a challenge. Of course, I'm not like when I was streaming, with the T-Rex army. I felt like you almost had to go out and do something, without any sort of risk, base building, for an hour or 2 hours just didn't seem, super interesting. You almost had to go, you almost felt obligated to go out and explore, but that could just be me. Hey, good morning, X-Runner. Good to see you too. All the crew's all here. So let's get into what I'm the topic for today's discussion. This is bigness. Talking about bigness. We're starting out with the Veilguard, which is pretty funny. But Veilguard, basically at this point, they've just admitted. I mean, this is January 22nd, but so it's still fairly new. They admitted that it underperformed expectations. People were all like, oh, they got 10,000 people. That's not bad. It's not a complete failure. But according to reports, Dragon Age Veilguard failed to meet EA's expectations by almost 50%, selling only 1.5 million units. So they were expecting it to at least sell 3 million. So, I mean, missing your mark by 50%, that is pretty bad. But at the same time, it's like, wow, I can't believe that they... I can't believe that you have to sell that much to make your money back. 3.5 million units. If they're being sold at 70, that's over $70 million. So if I assume the game itself probably cost, let's see, I mean, if you need to maybe over not quite 200 million, but probably, upwards of over $100 million to make the game, if that's how many units they want to move. And then lack of post launch DLC might have influenced its lower than expected sales. Might have influenced it. So I kind of think, especially when you look at this, Dragon Age Veilguard has been put on hold. A large portion of the writing staff behind Dragon Age Veilguard has been laid off, and won't be working on Mass Effect 5. And I really hope the lessons we're learning here, Mass Effect 5 needs to stylistically look like Mass Effect and be subtle with its writing. Dragon Age died almost single-handedly from off the less realistic art style, not hitting with longtime fans, and clips of its bad writing going viral. If this happens again, BioWare won't be around for Mass Effect 5. Fingers crossed they nail it. So according to LinkedIn, the restructuring of the termination of Dragon Age Veilguard's lead writer, Trick. What kind of first name is Trick? Trick Weekses? Karen West Weeks. What, they're like a husband and wife team? Why do they have the same last name? Narrative editor Ryan Corman, Jennifer Clavier, Cott, associate game producer Daniel Steele, Lena Anderson, product manager Michelle Flam also let go, and writer Cheryl Chi, who wrote Dragon Age's Lena, Isabel, Blackwell, and Harding as move to EA Motive. That's a lot of women. That's a lot of women in that in the list here. 1, 2, 3, like 4, 5. I'm assuming Trick is a man. I don't know. It's hard to say. You never know any. But this is kind of like the backdrop for like the idea that, you know, obviously their focus on stuff like, you know, top surgery scars, you know, the sort of like I said, bad writing going viral with like the trans like lecture clip where it's like, oh, I misgendered you and now I got to do push-ups. That kind of stuff like turns a lot of like, you know, their core demographic men, you know, like teenage to adult men. When they see that, they're like, maybe this isn't for me, you know? I don't really want to deal with this. When you pay $70, if you're dropping that much money for a video game, you want it to wow you. You want it to like be like, whoa, this is super awesome. And it just seemed like it didn't hit. It did not hit that well with a lot of the longtime fans. So, Game Me has problems, and you know, many people are here to point out the sort of wokeness of it. But I think the bigger problem than that is bigness. Games ballooned into massive $200 million endeavors that, you know, carry the risk of bankrupting entire studios with their failures, i.e. Concord. What this leaves is studios trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator with safe, sanitized games. One of the big, you know, criticisms of Veilguard, even from like normal people that aren't like the culture war stuff, is that the dialogue felt safe and sanitized. You know, they added a trans character and then like they gave you no options to be mean to the trans character, which is kind of bizarre, you know, in a game, a role-playing game that at least supposedly lets you, especially, you know, I remember the only BioWare game I played, you could like kill like half your party, if I remember right, if you go down the dark path, you know, in the encoder. So the option, like not really like a lot of mean options, I think definitely hurt that game. So, you know, if you want an open world like live service gacha game, you know, you could get 5 of them. You know, the marketing machine is what's really driving a lot of creative decisions, and games are the worst for it. So I wanted to sort of dive into some of the issues with, you know, the bloat that's in video games. So this is an older article, you know, from October 2024, October 4th. But what I really want to kind of focus on, this is the CEO, Tim Wiltz. And he kind of talked about in this article about the sort of over-scoping that games tend to do. And one of the things he mentioned here, it's not necessarily that the genre has moved on, because great games will always do well. One of the things we try and do at Saber, and this is part of my job as a creative officer of all teams, is we have core belief that what you do every second, what happens when you push these buttons, that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction and gameplay and the feeling you have. And then we adhere to our core pillars, like be the ultimate space marine, melee, range, swarms. That's it. And a lot of teams throughout development will overscope games. They look at some other games that just came out and say, oh, we got to do that. Let's add that. We got to do this. And they lose focus on the core, what actually makes the game fun. And I think he's 100% right with this, because you look at Space Marine 2, it was kind of praised as a return to this sort of like early 2000s era Xbox games, because it is a simple game. You know, the stages aren't, open world. They're very straightforward. You kind of go down a set path. You have to fight through the swarms that attack you. It's usually like you get in a fight. There's a little bit of exploration with some exposition. Then you get in another fight. Maybe almost too much exploration, but they tightened it up a lot more with this game over Space Marine 1. That was a big criticism I had of it. But the sort of swarm technology and the fighting and really just the presentation, I think really carries the game, because like they said, the stuff that they're focused on, be the ultimate space marine, they nailed that really, really well. When you look at the motion that they have in it, the way you break through to the next level is like they either like pick it up and then throw this giant statue, or like they just kick this rubble like out of the way. The way you stomp on things with like melee is amazing. The actual like kills, which I thought, man, am I just going to get sick of doing these like melee kills? But, they're an important part of the, is your sort of survival, is to do the melee to re-get your armor, the executions. And the range, you can like blow stuff away with, blow people's heads off with bolters and whatnot. And the swarms are actually really, really cool. I think it's really what made the game so fun is the amount of like little chaff, and it actually creates a lot of kind of interesting strategy too. Like, how do you use the chaff to like refill your armor? How do you avoid, because they can, if you let them go, they do a lot of damage to you. So you can't just focus on like the bigger creatures. You have to sort of deal with the swarms and sort of use the swarms to manage your armor to make sure you don't take a ton of damage. So they did a great job with this, and this kind of shows you, this is what it's done right, and it kind of and it also shows that people still want these games that the main campaign is like 8 to 10 hours. The multiplayer missions you complete in a few hours. So this under 20 hours if you just went through the game once, and this is a $70 game. So you would think, that's crazy. That's crazy. You're presenting like $70 and you only have like 20 hours of content, let's say. If you just play through it once, you don't use any of the multiplayer or the versus mode, you could potentially increase your time exponentially. But, that's all they had, especially at the beginning. And the idea of that still selling over 5 million copies, which is what they've gotten since then, it does seem kind of crazy. But if you do it well, if you they focused on the stuff, they made a really good looking, like I said, the presentation and the gameplay merge perfectly to make you like feel like in that universe, and just the sort of like badass feeling you have when you're playing a Space Marine cutting stuff down. It's awesome. It is really awesome, but it is a risk for developers. And this is from a blog from a developer called Derek Yu. He's kind of famous for making Spelunky, and he's done some other indie stuff. I think he was the director on this UFO 50 or whatever it's called, or 51 or whatever it's called. It's like a collection of like mini games that he got together with a bunch of indie developers to make. I think it's done pretty well. But he's talking about broad appeal here. The other access of our framework is broad appeal, which, to be honest, can be a little bit unpleasant to think about. Like you're trying to win a popularity contest or something instead of being yourself. But to be clear, broadly appealing doesn't necessarily mean good or worthwhile. It just means that it appeals to a large number of people. Personally, I enjoy playing games that are popular and also games that are niche. But there's another way to think about popularity as a creator. I enjoy trying to find the intersection between my own interests and the larger gaming community, because that feels more of the back and forth communication I want from making art. I feel like I can learn and teach the most with that kind of mindset. Also, you could think about appealing as much or as little as you want. How much room do you have in your vision to consider your audience interest? As a new indie dev, you might want to focus on broadly appealing concepts until you understand your own voice better. Or maybe you already have a strong voice, but you want to save its full power for when you could shoulder more risks, i.e., you have more resources. Obviously, no one can predict with 100% certainty what will be popular. There are trends that we can see in the success of individual games, the evolutions of games as an art form. With these trends in mind, we can start developing a sense for what matters on a fundamental level to the average player, and maybe what is exciting about video games in a general sense. From there, you can decide how much you want to factor into your own plans. And number one here is bigness, this idea of having bigness. And you look at some of the success of these games like GTA, Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring. They're all like, these gigantic open world games. If you track how games have evolved, you can see there's a trend of virtual worlds getting larger, from a single screen to scrolling cameras to overall maps to large open worlds that could take hours to cross on foot. Games have tried to give player more agency over time, from totally linear level-based structures to free exploration. Putting it all together, we can see players are generally excited by the prospect of getting lost in large world games, where there's a lot of variety and a lot of ways for them to express their own creativity. I mean, we had Silver Bishop here talk about the Zomboid, Zomboid in there. That's another game, that has that sort of bigness in it. But when we look at, but he goes on to talk about it's not obviously every successful game has a large open world. So maybe it's accurate to say that players want games to feel big. They don't necessarily need to be big. That could mean the smaller game world that players could visit many times in many different ways. Randomized level generation, build run based gameplay as seen in games like Brogue, pictured right, are what indie developers have given games this big quality without resorting to large open worlds. Although it's less effective, another way to make a small game feel bigger is to add extra modes that put a different spin on static content. So you have games like, roguelikes have been very popular lately. And what they do is they give you like the idea of like infinite possibilities, randomly generated dungeons, random power-ups. No run feels the same. There's like an infinite, combination of possibilities that you could get from a run. Games like Vampire Survivors, which are insanely small games. It's just, a few levels, and the gameplay is fairly simple. But you have, you can get different power-ups, you can do different builds, you have different characters with different, abilities on it. So between that, you can have so many different possibilities that you can, play for hours and hours doing no more one run feels the same. Compelling characters and lore also generate a feeling that the game is larger than the sum of its part. So what players interact with in game might not be a lot, but you can give them the sense they're part of something larger. If they're excited enough by the possibilities, they might fill in the blanks themselves. You don't need that kind of world building right in a single game either. You can build on these ideas across a series. Oh boy. With each game you release, the shared world becomes larger, and each individual game starts to feel bigger by virtue of its connections. And I mean, I saw this with like Gravity Circuit. It's a game that's like Mega Man, has 8 robot masters, but what they added a hub world. They added, different upgrades to collect and special moves to unlock. They have 12 different collectibles in each stage. You have achievements. You have, different modes like Circuit Mode, New Game Plus. All of these. While I think that they distract from the core experience, there's no doubt that it makes players feel like they're getting more bang for their buck. And you have games like Valheim, Core Keeper, Terraria, which have this sort of like the maps are fairly big, but they also have this sort of sense that you start small and then you collect the your upgrades, you get your right ores, you build your right armor, then you can expand to the next biome and new things to explore, and then you do that loop over and over and over again. So like you have this small world that slowly expands to this giant world, and it takes a bunch of time, and it's it's very satisfying. These games have been very popular. It's like a simple loop. It's a simple core gameplay loop that gets you a lot of hours and a lot of exploration out of it, and makes the player feel like they're paying $20, but they're getting like easily like 40 to 50 hours worth of gameplay just by exploring each and every biome. It's very fun. It's fun and it's effective. I like these games. All those games I listed, I quite enjoyed. But gives you that sort of feeling of bigness. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that this sort of popularity kind of leaves not as much space for, like I say, like games like Gravity Circuit that are simple, really focused. I don't want a ton of filler. And I mean, you even think of like games like Valheim, the fact that the amount of time you have to spend traveling in some of these places, or like Core Keeper or Terraria, you do get stuff that eventually makes it quicker, but you do spend a lot of time simply just moving from A to B in these worlds. So like, is that, really fascinating gameplay? Not necessarily, but that's, part of the games. And some people, just want to get lost and spend some time in a game that doesn't really, challenge them constantly. They just want to chill. The sort of like chill genre of games. And, there's nothing wrong with that. The other way, games bloat, and then we look over here at the Smash Brothers here, is that there's a ton of sequels. There's a ton of long-running franchises, live service. Well, this leads them to start adding more and more as the games go on. Taking away features is kind of hard. You don't want to take away features. You want players to think that they're getting more with each sequel. It's getting better and better. And an easy way to do that is just to keep adding more. Yeah, and this is where it started. Smash Bros. Ultimate, the series started with 12 playable characters. Now they have, let's see, how many do they have? 89 characters now. How are they going to beat it with the next game? Smash Bros. Super Ultimate. Where are they going to go from here? Is it going to have over 100 characters? Does this make the game better? It's a lot of fun to sort of speculate what game, what new characters are going to be added, but there's no possibility that these characters are balanced at all. And look at stuff like Pokemon. You started with 150, now they have over 1,000. I've given up on trying to remember its names. I feel like, Pokemon has slowly kind of lost their impact as, it's like, oh, here's another set of 100 Pokemon. Here's another one. Here's one that's, a key. Here's one that's a blender. Who knows what household appliance they're going to put into the next Pokemon game. Here's a tea kettle. Actually, I think they probably do have a tea kettle already. But, you look at live service games. League of Legends, now has 170 champions. It had, back when I played it, back in 2011, it had 29 characters. Genshin Impact started with 22 characters when I started playing it. And now, 4 years later, it has 94 characters. And in these characters, the new characters and features add novelty, but they don't make the gameplay better. Often, like with games like League of Legends, even when I was still playing it, I noticed you have power creep, that makes old characters obsolete. Balance problems, usually, especially in the case like Riot, it usually causes them to sort of flatten the characters. Take away the stuff that's unique about the character because it's kind of hard to balance, and kind of bring every character to a baseline where you can sort of balance them out to make sure one's not more powerful than the other. And what it leads to is just boring gameplay. And what content, could keep older players engaged, one of the issues is that there's also a strong desire to attract new players. So it's not as the series go on, it gets harder and harder they make it more complicated. It's usually the opposite. They make it easier and simpler. Look at Guilty Gear Strive, where they just seem to simplify the game more and more in order to appeal to a mass audience. So rather than the games taking more and more skill, you have your hardcore, your hardcore player base, which already knows how to play the game. Instead of them trying to appeal to that audience by giving them a game that's even harder and take more skill so they can build it up, you have a game that just gets easier and easier. And of course, you just saw Elon Musk kind of becoming one of the best Diablo 4 players while not even leveling up his own character. So, how much skill does that game take? If a guy that can play, the game for maybe 100 hours can beat a guy that has played 1,000 hours. Now, what sense does that make? And of course, sadly, the sort of video game media is, more than willing to play along to sort of push these games that are, these gigantic productions with, music scores, voice actors, facial recognition software. You look at the Game Awards, and again, they just focus on music, actors, graphics, art direction, esports programs. Almost nothing about gameplay unless we're talking about the game itself. That's the only way gameplay gets an award, is if it's in the sort of grand total of the game. And you have stuff like Wukong, Elden Ring, Final Fantasy got a ton of different nominations. Balatro got a nod. Astrobot managed to win because I think it was kind of a novelty, and I think PlayStation might be a little bit favored in those game awards. That's just me. But presentation has become more important than games or gameplay, and from a marketing perspective, it makes sense. But it's a shame because you'd think a media, the sort of trades media, would try and cultivate some sort of knowledge among the fans to sort of appreciate some of these simpler, really focused games, but they don't. They just want to be advertisers for big studios. And what these big studios have is, what the advantage they have over these smaller indies and stuff is that they can make these giant games with large presentations and celebrities in their games. So, that's what gets pushed without, any sort of discipline and courage from developers or, games media that wants to cultivate a sense of appreciation for elegant game design. There's a lot of headwind facing developers that just want to make solid games that respect the player's time and don't add a bunch of fluff to it. Even as you look at GDC, most of these talks are marketing. I mean, just look, they got a playlist. It's 74 things long of just, marketing, no budget DEI marketing for indie games, the golden rule of game promotion, inclusive marketing for indies. Wow. Very good. Making marketing mistakes. Again, it's just how Killer King built an esports scene on an indie budget. Wow. It's all about marketing your games. So, yep, that is one of the issues I think that's facing the industry. As long as it's about getting bigger and bigger with, larger worlds and presentations, the budgets are just going to continue to spiral out of control. So, it's an issue. It's definitely an issue. But now it's time to move. But let's move on. Let me take a drink. We're going to cover the news. All right, let me read some of these comments. Yeah, skills are expended greatly in animals. So they do have skills in animals. Picking up ladies at work. Right on. We catch up on chat here. Just talking about $70 for 20 hours. I'm more than 1,000 hours in Stardew Valley for $20. That's a steal. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's value in these games, but I'll still play $70 for 20 hours if it's a really solid 20 hours. I really enjoy it. Loop Hero. I've never seen that. Now, I'm not, like I said, I'm willing to pay, like even stuff like Echoes of Wisdom didn't take me that long, but it's really well done. It has, beautiful music, beautiful graphics, the story I enjoyed. I'm a big Nintendo fan, so I'll dish out that money if it's solid, if it's a really good game. But yeah, I guess that is the catch. It has to be good. Like I could, if you can put out a game that's all right. Like Valheim, I enjoy, and it has kind of like addictive, some pretty addictive loops in it, gameplay loops. It's enjoyable. You can really just sort of lose yourself in that game, and it takes a lot of time. But I wouldn't necessarily say like it's like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing game. It's just, again, mostly it's sort of like chill out, get lost in it, enjoy it, so you can get a lot of hours out of it. And it's easy to equate hours of gameplay versus dollars. That's an easy calculation to make if you want to like put that as value. So I think there's still room for really well made games that short and with a great presentation. I know games like the shoot 'em ups and stuff, which I've been enjoying, which you just play it multiple times. But those are pretty cheap. You can play through it endlessly with a really tight gameplay loop. But let's move on to news. Big shakeup at Sony. Hideaki Noshino has been appointed the sole CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment. It seems like they're getting rid of some of the Americans here at the top. Hirako Tonoki named corporate CEO. Hideaki Noshino elevated to sole CEO role at Sony Interactive Entertainment. Shake up in its leadership, elevating in Tokyo and San Mateo. Elevating Hiroki Tokyo to the top CEO post, while Hideaki Noshino takes the reins of Sony Interactive Entertainment as solely CEO of the unit that houses PlayStation. Was approved late Tuesday at the entertainment giant's board of directors in Tokyo. 38-year Sony veteran who most recently served as chief operating officer and chief financial officer. Is this guy going to be the unfortunate part is this guy kind of seems like a pencil pusher, He doesn't have any actual like creative experience, which kind of sucks. Will serve as the president and CEO of Sony Corp. The handoff from Yoshino to Tokyo comes across with a restructuring of senior business ranks. Obviously Sony hasn't been doing great lately. The sales of PS5s have not been awesome. And of course, the recent stuff, failures like Concord, which cost them like $400 million, cannot be good. Cannot be a good thing. So we'll see if they can turn it around. I would hope for a guy that had more, game development experience at the top. These appointments were made in the wake of departure of CEO Jim Ryan, which, really was pushing Concord too. Like it was like one of his babies. So that might have led to it too. And you've seen a lot of like cancellation with the live service type of games. That risk seems like it isn't paying off at all. So hopefully they can take it in a better direction and kind of focus on making some solid games like they used to, focusing in on some of their old IPs, getting some new IPs, just making good games. Again, instead of like chasing live service trends. But we'll see. We'll see what goes on. Maybe they'll just start making gacha slop. You never know. You never know. Herman Hust will no longer be the co-CEO of PlayStation. So another white guy out. They're cleaning house. They're cleaning house of the Westerners. I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. We'll see. This was a really interesting thing. Let me take a drink of water before I read it. This is Katashiro Harada, which is the sort of chief game director for Tekken. He's a big part of the Tekken franchise, loved by the community. He's often involved in it. And this is a really interesting read. I'm going to read it to you, but let me get a drink first. Because the people recently, just sort of the backdrop to this, recently Ninja Gaiden 2 came out. Black, the sort of like remake of it, or remaster, whatever you want to call it, of Ninja Gaiden 2, and the announcement of Ninja Gaiden 4. So Itagaki, which is a guy that made Ninja Gaiden 2 and was left Temco, very kind of like public breakup, not on good terms, but people have sort of been talking about Itagaki again, and some of the stuff that came out about, he was also the guy that made Dead Alive as well as Ninja Gaiden, and he kind of evidenced that when he was friends with Itagaki and DOA, that literally had this printed in no particular order. So this is Itagaki's hit list, top 5 most hated games in no particular order. And it's Tekken, Tekken 2, Tekken 3, Tekken 4, Tekken 5. I can no longer figure out what the hell they're trying to do with the numbering. I don't know which one is which. I don't know what they're trying to do with all of the spin-offs. So this includes Nina, Death by Degrees as well. I don't think it's even needs saying, but people should stay away from Tekken. Nothing left to say. Just don't want them to disappoint me anymore. It's so annoying. Please don't annoy me anymore. So this is Itagaki, the sort of like maker of Tekken and DOA franchise. So this is him sort of talking about his history. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it because I think it's very fascinating. I'm not sure how you perceive my relationship with Mr. Itagaki, but I can tell you it's likely different from what you imagine. Let me provide a general overview with some key topics regarding my history with Mr. Itagaki. However, consider this a warning. What follows is content that would normally be covered in media articles interview. I strongly advise any impatient fighting game fans out there to stop reading it. No scratch. This is a serious warning. If you have a typical level of patience and common sense, you better not reading further. There's a hard chance that you'll fall asleep midway. Even though I admitted most of the events focus on major incidents, let me be clear, I warned you ahead of time. This is obviously, he's just warning that it's a lot to read. Now, what I'm about to discuss happened during the old Namco era, and it has almost nothing to do with the post-merger Bandai Namco era. So younger generation employees who joined after the Bandai merger, consider yourself exempt from this content. Also, forgive my translation errors or nuances I might have misinterpreted. I'm still stuck at English level of my university days. Yes, I've warned you about everything. You should not read further. You'll regret if you do. So at first contact, it was during the 1990s. The first Dead Alive was announced. On the way back from the game show, I happened to run into Sega's Virtual Fighter team, who would later become the heads of Sega AM2 at Station. Coincidentally, Mr. Itagaki also appeared, and the key people behind VF, Tekken, and DOA were all there by chance, so we decided to take advantage of this opportunity and went out for drinks at the Izukaya in Shinjuku. At the Izakaya, I and 2 members of Sony AM team got into an animated discussion about shared technical topics. At the time, Namco shared some animation control techniques with Sega through engineers we had headhunted from Sega. Of course, just a few years later, the Tekken project independently developed its own animation control technology from scratch. The knowledge and foundational technology developed by the Tekken project at the time would become the very origins of Bandai Namco's human action development technology today. Surprisingly, many Bandai Namco employees were unaware of this fact. Tekken is the ancestor of Bandai Namco's polygon-era animation and action control technologies. Without this foundation, it's self-evident we wouldn't have been able to co-develop Smash Brothers with Mr. Sakurai. Wow, that's... So Tekken has kind of gave root to Smash Bros, which is kind of interesting. Mr. Itagaki listened with great interest as I and the Sega executive discussed these topics. Later, we all bonded over casual, non-work-related chatter about games. One moment stands out even after nearly 30 years. Mr. Itagaki said to me, "Mr. Harada, you're a really approachable and funny person." At the time, Mr. Itagaki still addressed me using polite language, and of course, I did the same for him. In other words, we don't know much about each other yet, and our relationship was very professional and gentlemanly at the time. And this is number 2, what Itagaki discovered. A few months later, the VF, Tekken, and DOA drinking session, I happened to run into Mr. Gagi at another gaming event. He approached me and said, "Harada, you're from Waseda University, aren't you? I also went to Waseda, and our time there overlapped. That makes you my junior." I responded, "I might be your junior, but I don't think we were there at the same time." However, he said, "No, I was so busy with Mahjong every day that it took me 7 years to graduate." I'm sure 7 years of graduate. Sheesh. I'm sure we were there at the same time. In fact, I remember seeing you during our university days. You were the captain of the yacht racing team, weren't you? Yes, Mr. Grakte had thoroughly researched my background and discovered that I was his junior. From now on, then, he started referring to me as his junior and speaking to me in a casual tone of a senior addressing a junior, dropping the polite language entirely. So he started researching up on Harada. The beginning of Itagaki's media strategy. Mr. Itagaki wasn't just a game designer or director. More than anything, he was starting to show his prowess as a producer. So this is when they start, kind of the rivalry starts. This became clear after he left Temco, and he explicitly told me as much. Back then, he began to seriously think about how to elevate DOA to surpass Tekken in terms of marketing and branding. Let's rewind a bit to the past. During that time, the arcade, and this is a really interesting history about the kind of like arcade gaming and how it transitioned. During this time, arcade gaming market was still thriving. Sega and Namco were both giants dominating the Japanese arcade market. Not only did they develop games, but they also operated their own arcade chains, domestically and internationally, managing a significant share of gaming distribution and publishing as well. Mr. Itagaki recognized that Temco couldn't compete against this level of marketing and publishing power. As a result, he explored media strategies not using only print magazines, but also the emerging internet media of the time. Despite his outwardly emotional demeanor, Mr. Itagaki had a very cool and calculating eye for analyzing resources and strategy. Among his various techniques, one of them was to deliberately bite at Tekken to draw media attention. In doing so, he even called me out by name and criticized Tekken games' design and other aspects. Let me emphasize, this was just one of the many strategies he employed, not his only approach. So this is kind of going down to this. Yeah, this is like Itagaki talking about Tekken. What games he hates the most? Tekken 1, 2 through 5. So, going back to this. 5. The Sudden Summons Incident. So this is back to 1998. Out of the blue, Itagaki called Namco directly and asked me by name. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Itagaki had started his media strategy of targeting Tekken and learned that I was his junior from university. Given the strained relationship I had with him at the time, his call left me deeply confused. Cautiously, I picked up the phone and he said, "This is kind of where it's interesting. Could you come to Tekko's headquarters, just you alone?" This reminded me of getting summoned by a delinquent upperclassman to the school building back in middle school. For a moment, I considered declining, but in the end, my curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to his request and headed to Namco headquarters the following day. Temco headquarters. When I arrived, Mr. Gaki greeted me and led me to a small room. There I saw something covered with a cloth that looked like an arcade cabinet, like a magician. Performing a stage act, he dramatically removed the color cover with a flourish. Underneath was an arcade cabinet and CTR monitor, revealing something for the first time, the development build of DOA 2, which had not been announced. It would debut in arcades a year later, in the fall of 1999. "You're the first outsider to see this screen," he said. More than the game itself, I was bewildered by his magician-like presentation. That aside, he had two main purposes for summoning me. First, he wanted to sell more DOA boards to the arcade market. At the time, Sega and Namco were the two largest buyers of arcade boards due to their extensive arcade chains. Normally, he would have approached Namco's sales team, but he felt that wasn't enough. Instead, he sought validation from a developer like me, hoping my endorsement would lead to Namco's purchasing more DOA boards. Secondly, he wanted to gauge DOA's performance, seeing how the Tekken project would react. If I so much as scoffed as DOA 2, he would take this as evidence that Tekken had superior technology and confidence. On the other hand, if I showed signs of being impressed or unsettled, he would use this as a benchmark to compare Team Ninja's position to the Tekken project. So he wants to invited the head of Tekken to sort of gauge how he would react to see if, he kind of saw them as their main competition. After presenting the content briefly, he said, "All right, give it a try." When I pressed the start button, he sat down right next to me as we were about to face off. I chose Kazumi under his unspoken pressure and began playing. Just seconds into the match, after pressing the punch button 3 times, he asked, "Well, what do you think?" I was completely thrown off. How could I possibly judge after only a few seconds? I instinctively replied, "It feels good to play." I expect him to retort, "How could you know just after a few seconds?" Instead, he responded with, "See, I told you, Hirata." At the moment, I was genuinely confused. Was he serious? Was this some kind of hidden camera prank? To be fair, DOA had already demonstrated impressive technical achievement for its time, even in its unfinished state. However, his insistence on immediately feedback and constant explanations while I played left me overwhelmed with information. Later, I learned from a former Team Ninja member that after my visit, Itagaki returned to the development floor and declared, "Today we beat Tekken." While I was merely startled by his approach, he took it as proof that I was overwhelmed by DOA 2's performance. There's a lot of rivalry going on behind the scenes of this sort of arcade market. This is number 6, Itagaki's analysis and strategy. Later, Mr. Itagaki explained to me that he felt a significant sense of accomplishment from his media strategy at the time. His aggressive stance against rival titles clearly led to a significant increase in readership, especially in Western gaming media. He told me that this approach, while unpopular in Japan, where comparative advertising was frowned upon, was highly effective overseas. I guess Americans, we like a rivalry. We like to see guys going head to head. Additionally, Itagaki was known by some for his vast knowledge of global history and military affairs, particularly World War II. He likened the relationship between DOA and Tekken to warfare. He believed that winning in war would require reconnaissance of the enemy's resources, so he conducted detailed analysis of Tekken project's capabilities. In his personal office, he even displayed a chart analyzing Namco's Tekken project's team's strength. This is kind of crazy, he began with the game staff credits, particularly investigating the educational backgrounds, careers, skills, and achievements of individuals listed. This is how he discovered and mentioned earlier that I was a junior at Waseda University. He also analyzed the order in which names appeared to the credits, finding patterns like this. Those listed at the top of each unit were not necessarily core technical contributors. Instead, they were likely managers skilled in people management or senior staff moving away from hands-on work. According to Itagaki, my presence as a young team leader at the time didn't align with these patterns, which made me stand out as an unusual figure to keep tabs on. So he's doing really thorough research into Tekken. He was correct in this assessment. At the time, I was privileged to work with brilliant individuals, some 10 years my senior, including directors and programmers regarded as geniuses. These senior colleagues provided me with exceptional support, allowing me to lead game design in an environment where I was, in a sense, spoiled. They often asked, "Hirata, what do you want to do? What do you need? We'll provide anything." It was an extraordinary setup that made me something of an anomaly in the industry. When our rivalry ended, Mr. Itagaki showed me his analysis charts during a later conversation. I was astonished by its accuracy. It identified key figures in the Tekken project who were instrumental at the time. Seeing it left me with an eerie feeling. So he's being stalked. Itagaki the stalker. During the late 90s and 2000s, when the gaming industry had yet to establish sophisticated marketing analysis, Itagaki had detailed understanding of Tekken's sales figures, customer demographics. Using this data, he developed strategies to elevate DOA's brand recognition by directly opposing Tekken in the media. At the same time, his product development strategy avoided head-on collisions with Tekken. Instead, he identified needs that Tekken didn't fulfill and areas where DOA could excel technically, crafting a distinct direction for his game. This sounds pretty brilliant. This is why DOA ultimately offered gameplay and targeted a market audience different from Tekken's. So Itagaki doing some really like high-level stuff to help his game succeed. Number 7, After the War. After Itagaki left Capcom in 2008, he called me again. At the time, our dynamic hadn't changed much from the previous 10 years. I still perceived our relationship as adversarial. Yet there he was calling me once again. He invited me to dinner where he shared he had left Temco. During the meal, he said something surprising. "Harada, you are my comrade in arms." I realized then that this was how he saw our relationship. He explained his strategies and thoughts for the time in detail, stating explicitly, "I never had a grudge against you, Namco or Tekken. On the contrary, I respected you all. When I compared the power dynamics in development, sales, and publishing, it was clear that a straightforward approach wouldn't work. I had to employ every strategy I could. I'm sorry for everything." Then he turned the tables and asked about Tekken strategies, particularly in terms of production, branding, and marketing. I explained many things, but emphasized this. Since the 1990s, I've been visiting arcade venues worldwide to see how players would engage with my games. I also, and this is actually really interesting how he kind of like saw the future. I also met with numerous arcade operators and distributors. Around the late 90s, I quickly noticed the rapid decline of arcade markets in the West. Arcades were shutting down at an alarming rate. This signaled that the battleground for fighting games was shifting from arcades to home consoles. More importantly, the value of one play for 100 yen, or 25 cents in the US, was disappearing. The incentives for the winning player to keep playing on a single coin was fading, as was the risk of losing coins for the losing player. This fundamentally changed the value perception of fighting games as a form of entertainment, which is kind of wild to think about. A lot of game design back in the day was around, getting players to spend coins, spend money in the arcades. Realizing this, we shifted Tekken's strategy towards establishing fighting games as a viable product for home console. As many know, Tekken was ahead of its time in the genre, having developed and released modes like Tekken Ball, which came before DOA Beach Volleyball, belt action modes such as Tekken Force, and pre-rendered movies and story campaign modes that went beyond the typical scope of fighting games. Which, story modes aren't necessarily, great for the arcades, but for a home console, that's, definitely a big value for people just wanting to play by themselves. In addition to this, I explained how I became aware of the emergence of community events in North America as arcades began to decline. At the time, these events were at grassroots level. They ranged from small gathering at someone's house to tournaments held in university halls or community centers. Over time, they grew into larger tournaments hosted in hotel ballrooms and gymnasiums. This is sort of like start of the esports scene. I recognized the potential of these events early on and began providing behind-the-scenes support to these communities. Specifically, we offered free rental of arcade cabinets and game boards, took care of transportation setup, and occasionally provided small prizes like posters for tournament winners. In fact, many veteran players in their 40s and 50s today may not have known my name or who I was back then, but might remember seeing me quietly setting up arcade machines at venues without even wearing sunglasses back then. So he was one of the first people to sort of catch on to the emergence of like the fighting game community in the esports scene. During this time, Street Fighter had gone into a decade-long hibernation following Street Fighter III, and the decline of arcades accelerated as the game markets shifted. Even as the other fighting game series disappeared, I focused on maintaining both the active home console market and the footholds in the Asian arcade market. In fact, the method of constantly releasing new games in the series without a break and using the huge profits made from arcade boards and in-game purchases to fund development of console versions was surprisingly able to continue all the way up to Tekken 7. This including supporting grassroots tournaments and community, the FGC, or fighting game community as known, to keep our business and development ongoing. So he did like a combination approach of arcades and in-game purchases with consoles. At the time, I can confidently say that very few developers were paying attention to the growing tournament scene in the West. How do I know this? Because during those years I was often the only Japanese developer on site, personally dealing cabinets or boards or observing events. While marketing representatives from various companies were present, I rarely saw other developers engaging directly with these communities. This approach allowed Tekken to continue its unnumbered releases steadily, even through the winter of the arcade market. While the Virtual Fighter series fell silent, we expanded into the Western market and secured a significant share. I believe that when I faced my own hardships, no one would come to my aid, but the support from an external entity, namely the core fighting game community in the market, would be the only thing I could rely on. I told Mr. Itagaki that I kept this strategy under wraps, either sharing it with the other teams in the company or discussing it with developers from other companies. I simply worked on it quietly. Upon hearing this, he was surprised and said, "What? That's not what a developer is supposed to do. Really, you're more action-oriented than I expected." It seemed that he had a stereotypical image of game developers born in the 1970s as people who stayed in their office, glued to their monitor, endlessly coding. To be fair, that was also part of my work, but by the late 90s, I was using the development downtime between projects to travel around the world. And to finish up, pointing into the confident, through this extended past strategy, has resolved my long-standing feud with Mr. Itagaki. This happened in the late 2008s. After that, every year I had received a drunken phone call from him, which had become something of a tradition. That said, I haven't received one in the last few years, come to think of it. And that's the end of this thread. So it's really cool to see this sort of rivalry between these people. Well, it's, I guess, almost kind of one-sided, but the sort of different strategies these two franchises took, with Tekken kind of focusing on the home console and the kind of growing community market that kind of came with the consoles, and Itagaki and DOA kind of focusing on the sort of rivalry to kind of up their own brand and get media attention to DOA and kind of position it as an alternative to Tekken, both being sort of the 3D fighters. But of course, DOA ultimately kind of focused more on the sort of beach volleyball aspect of it. I think that ended up being a bigger seller, as of course it translates much better to home consoles, as it's like a single player game. And of course, with the sort of ladies, you can sell a shit ton of DLC. Like here's a string bikini for $5 or whatever. So it's interesting how both the fighting games go. And I don't know if DOA is going to get sort of revived. It kind of fell off. I don't know when the last DOA was released. Let me kind of Google that. Last DOA released was back in 2019. Wow. Oh wait, was that when DOA was released? No, I think it was the last one. DOA 6. So it's been a while. And of course, Itagaki has left Temco, so who knows what's going on, but this was sort of like spurred because of the recent resurgence of Ninja Gaiden. And of course, Itagaki is kind of famous for working on that. And a lot of kind of purists from Ninja Gaiden 2, Itagaki has a lot of hardcore fans that kind of consider the games made after his release, not as good as Ninja Gaiden 2. For some reason, they call them like jihadists too, like Itagaki's jihadists type of thing. As sort of like the community is divided, the Ninja Gaiden community is divided since that schism between the two. But it's really cool to see this sort of thread that Harada put out, and the sort of history, and an interesting history between the two franchises and the shift in the market. Moving on, we have Path of Exile. There's a blatant cheater at the top of your leaderboards. At least remove the account if you're too afraid to ban him. So Elon Musk, number 3 with fatalism for the win. A lot of people are complaining that Elon Musk is still on the leaderboard. I don't know if this has been removed since then, but Elon Musk has reached rank 3 on the PoE hardcore leaderboard. So it is kind of sad. It is kind of sad to see that. I think for players that Invoker must be really good because it's the top 3. But you got a guy that's a known piloter, admitted to piloting. Elon Musk even replying with the glasses. Rank 1 inbound, so he's kind of sucking up to him. Rank 3, even after admitting to piloting. Kind of sad. Kind of sad for PoE players because it's obviously everyone knows it, but it kind of makes you think like, is he the only person doing it? When he's like famously doing it, known for piloting, getting boosted. Are these who else on this list is getting boosted? You have to wonder. It kind of sucks for people that want to be sort of legitimate players. Ubisoft isn't doing well as it lays off 185 of its staff. So they're kind of downsizing. It's set to close its UK-based studios in Leamington, as it shed 185 jobs across the business. And other worse news, Ubisoft just keeps getting hit. Things aren't going well. A YouTuber and content creator, Shoei Kendo, gets his Assassin's Creed Shadow removed for hate speech from YouTube. So it seems like either, I assume it's Ubisoft or Ubisoft fans have been trying to get this removed. It did get restored, though. They were removed 7 times. Every time the video gets it back, it gets removed again and again. I'm contacting YouTube's internal team. So there's an active effort to suppress some of this Shadows content, as Ubisoft really needs Assassin's Creed Shadows to hit a home run, but I have a feeling it's not going to be a home run for them. And then, of course, he mentioned that the video is back up, thanks to everyone that encouraged and supported me. The video had been removed 12 times so far. I contacted YouTube and also changed the title. Hopefully it stays up this time. I spent all day fighting to get it back. And this is from Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. This is an interesting thread. So this came out, and it runs on Unreal 5 graphics. But what they do is it's basically it's the Sigma 2 animations directly underneath it. So every new model in the game from the old Sigma models, they're taking the animation from. Additionally, not every old model is one-to-one. Sometimes it can be the wrong costume. So it's kind of interesting the way they did it. So they just have like the old, wireframe underneath it, the old model underneath it, and then they just stick Unreal 5 model on top of it, and then just run it like that. So it's just, just like a graphics remake, essentially. So they also allows them to, like, they do, I guess, have new ragdoll physics and dismemberment systems, so never forget, you're always playing Sigma 2, even though it looks pretty now, thanks to the Unreal Engine. They're kind of showing off some of that stuff. They have the old model, so they just stuck like Sigma 2 and then put a coat of paint on top of it. Essentially, it's really interesting the way they did it. Kind of an interesting way to go about updating your graphics for new consoles, while not having to do as much work of redoing all the animations and physics and that kind of stuff. We'll skip that. Man, I guess that's it. Oh, there's some other stories. Skies of Arcadia is coming back, which is kind of, well, they registered the trademark, so maybe it's coming back, but it's kind of exciting to hear that. I was always a big fan of Skies of Arcadia on the GameCube. I ended up playing on the GameCube rather than the Dreamcast, but it's a cool series. It might be interesting if it gets a new game. Multiverse shut down. Not all that surprising. It was kind of like a Warner Brothers trying to come out with their own Smash Brothers clone. It didn't seem to work that well. Didn't end up hitting it. I think they shut it down and they re-released it once already. Now they're just like, we're done with it. We're going to be focusing on Fortnite collabs in the future. Dr. Disrespect, Midnight Society, the game studio Dr. Disrespect co-founded, has shut down. I think they parted ways with them, kind of after the Dr. Disrespect incidents. And now their game Drop Dead, which is in development for 3 years, will never be released. So they have had to shut down. I think they kind of like a casualty of the minor texting incident with Dr. Disrespect. And then Mass Effect 5, BioWare doesn't require support from its full studios. They're moving staff to other team. So I don't know if Mass Effect, I guess 5 is still happening, but they're moving a lot of their staff around. This was another thing. I don't know. Maybe I'll rant. I think I'll rant on this later about Chinese. There's been so much praise for like Chinese games because they're doing stuff, competently. But so much of it is just, derivative stuff. It's like, oh, here's your Marvel Rivals is an Overwatch clone that they actually, have discovered the magic of the fact that people like sexy women and, masculine men in their games, and they're using the IP in like competent ways instead of trying to make some trans crap or gay characters. And who would guess it? Men enjoy that kind of stuff. But I might talk about this more later because really a lot of Chinese stuff is just gotcha slop. They are like putting out the most derivative games possible, but doing it in a very competent way. They're really good when it comes to graphics. And I think I won't do the review. I'm already over time, so my voice, we're beating it, exactly. China isn't beating us. We're beating ourselves, exactly. If Western games and creatives can like realize that, hey, maybe we should just appeal to men and stop with a lot of this dumb feminist crap. I think they can make games a lot better, a lot more focused and more appealing to both sexes, to be honest, because I don't think women like a lot of this stuff either, to be honest. I think it's just, sort of liberal echo chamber that doesn't want to do that. No, we're going to cut it here. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. And be sure to like, support the channel, all that stuff. And I'll see you next week. Let me redirect. I think Red Hawk is hosting Post Zero. Let me see if I can find him. Has he put it up yet? That's the real question. Or something going on here. I know I'm subbed to him. I do not see it. What the heck? So maybe we won't be redirecting. Oh well. It should be on Red Hawk's channel. Or maybe I'm wrong. Let me see. Where's my subs? It's always such a pain in the ass. Like, I'm subbed to the guy. Why could... Oh, wait. Let me search it. Problem is, I don't think he rarely uses the channel. Oh, here he is. Let's see. Does he have a live? No. Nothing up there. Hopefully it'll be on his channel. If not, kind of check Jack's channel, or check Jack's Twitter if you're interested. But we'll see you guys later. Bye-bye for now.